Before the empath leaves, there is always a long phase in which they themselves don't realize that they are being pulled into a subtle emotional drain mechanism where every current of energy in the relationship flows one way toward the narcissist's false self. This is not a normal interaction between two people, but an unconscious process between two opposing archetypes that Jung calls the collision of unlived parts. End quote. The empath carries within them the archetype of the wounded healer, always wanting to lift, mend, soothe. The narcissist carries the archetype of the inflated shadow, lacking inner energy, surviving only by feeding on someone else's light. Their interaction is not love. It is a distorted exchange of energy, where one gives to connect and the other receives to exist. The relationship begins with idealization. The narcissist does not see the empath as they truly are, but as a projected image, an endlessly understanding figure, an unconditional healer, a perfectly loyal soul. And the empath, accustomed to sensing the world through deep emotional layers, is drawn in not because they are foolish, but because they see in the narcissist's wounds a fragment of their own darkness. From that point, an unconscious contract forms. The empath gives, the narcissist absorbs. But idealization is only the surface. When closeness causes the narcissist's shadow to emerge, primitive shame, insecurity, the emptiness they cannot face, they begin to devalue the empath. Not because the empath changes, but because the empath's light shines too directly on the darkness they try to hide. So they push that darkness onto the empath, blame, criticize, make the empath believe they are the problem. This is not truth. It is the survival mechanism of a fragile ego terrified of being exposed. And when the empath is placed in the wrong role long enough, they begin to fall into disorder. The narcissist operates through ambiguity. Tender today, cold tomorrow. Praise followed by insult. Pulling close, then pushing away. This ambiguity creates dependency not on love, but on the need to regain the fleeting moments of peace that once appeared. In Jungian psychology, this is the activation of the primal wound pattern, where the empath confuses chaos with connection, endurance with love. From here, they fall into fawning, sacrificing themselves to keep harmony, mirroring the unstable environments they may have lived in during childhood. Once dependency forms, the narcissist enters the control phase. Not crude, violent control, but emotional pacing, calculated silence, strategic anger, conditional praise, drip-fed criticism. They do not control the empath's actions, they control the empath's nervous system. They make the empath wait, guess, self-blame, self-correct, self-torment. And the empath, in trying to save the relationship, becomes the alchemical vessel holding all of the narcissist's chaos. They absorb pain that is not theirs, thinking it is love, when in truth it is a slow departure from their own center. Empaths don't leave immediately, not because they are weak, but because of three invisible bindings. The trauma bond that addicts them to rare warm moments, the spiritual loyalty that convinces them the other person needs them, and the shadow pattern that makes sacrifice feel like duty. But the soul cannot be stretched forever. There comes a moment when the smile is no longer a smile, the voice no longer a voice, and their inner peace disappears entirely. Then intuition, the faculty buried under emotional chaos, returns. A vague but forceful thought appears. This is not my place. And this moment, though no one hears it, marks the beginning of the archetypal separation. There is no shouting, no declarations, no dramatic exit. The empath's departure always begins with a silent withdrawal of energy. They stop trying to understand, stop justifying, stop carrying, stop hurting themselves to keep the peace. Their heart returns to them, and as energy retracts back into the center of their soul, the relationship on the unconscious level has already ended. The narcissist will not notice until it is far too late. But the very moment the empath withdraws energy, the fate of the relationship is sealed. From here, leaving is only a matter of time. The moment an empath leaves has never been an explosion, but an invisible crack spreading through the deepest layer of their soul. A crack that makes no sound, yet changes the entire inner structure. An empath does not leave because they stopped loving, but because they can no longer exist inside an emotional ecosystem their soul no longer belongs to. The departure always begins at the energetic level, not the behavioral one. And once that energy starts pulling back, every unconscious contract that bound them to the narcissist dissolves automatically. This is the moment Jung calls the withdrawal of projections, when the veil of illusion falls and the empath sees the narcissist not as the version they hoped the person would become, but as who they truly are. Not grand, not deep, not mysterious, just an empty ego living off the energy of others. This realization does not create rage, as many imagine, but a strange quiet, like when someone steps back from a painting and realizes the beauty that once mesmerized them was merely the reflection of their own inner hunger. At that moment, the empath stops looking for reasons, stops persuading themselves, stops making excuses for wounds disguised as promises. Connection shuts off inside them like a lamp losing power. They still smile, still talk, still carry out responsibilities, but the connection, the thing that kept them there, is gone. And this silent disappearance triggers a free fall inside the narcissist, because they sense the empath shift not through words, but through the absence of the energy they always assumed belonged to them. When the empath withdraws energy, the first thing to break is the fear that kept them staying. Once the fear of abandonment no longer dominates, the empath can no longer be manipulated. Once they no longer crave validation from the narcissist, the psychological games instantly lose effect. Once they stop trying to prove their worth inside a system designed to keep them lacking, the unconscious contract is erased. The terrifying part for the narcissist is that they notice all of this before the empath consciously does. Their unconscious is extremely sensitive to energetic withdrawal because their entire false self relies on supply from others. The empath's departure awakens in them 4 archetypal reactions on the unconscious level. A quiet rage at losing power, a subtle hoovering instinct to pull you back, a victim narrative to seize control of the story before it escapes them. And, deepest of all, a collapse in the dark when they feel the void where your energy used to be. But the beautiful truth is this: the empath does not leave as a victor, but as someone awakened. This awakening is not an explosive "I can't take this anymore," but the quiet recognition that they no longer see themselves in the relationship. They see a soul exhausted from trying to fix someone who never wanted to change, a heart treated as fuel, a self twisted to fit someone else's shape. And once they see this, they cannot return to who they used to be. This is the moment the old self dissolves, Jung's Nigredo stage of alchemy, where everything burns down to prepare for rebirth. The empath does not leave like a triumphant warrior, but like a soul that has completed a cycle and has no reason to remain. The departure is not loud. It is like sunrise after a long night, quiet, irreversible, powerful enough to clear the last remaining illusions. And the final irony is this: the moment of silence no one sees is the beginning of the narcissist's inner panic, because they instinctively understand that they have lost not merely a person, but the only source of energy their false self depended on to survive. When the empath leaves in silence, it is not just a departure. It is the beginning of the collapse on the other side. A narcissist survives on reflection, not connection. In Kohut's self-psychology, their ego does not form from within. It depends on 3 special types of objects, called self-objects. Those who mirror them so they can feel grand, those they can lean on to feel safe, and those they treat as extensions of themselves so they don't feel alone. The empath unconsciously fulfills all 3 perfectly. They mirror emotions, they understand, they soothe, they hold space for the other's instability with gentleness. They become a kind of container for the fractures the narcissist has never been able to repair on their own. No one replaces an empath easily, not because the empath is extraordinary, but because they have unconsciously become part of the psychological machinery the narcissist depends on. And when the empath leaves, the narcissist experiences what Kohut calls self-fragmentation, a disintegration of the ego structure. Without their primary self-object, their sense of self no longer knows where to lean to exist. This isn't sadness. It feels like being severed from themselves. A narcissist doesn't have the internal strength to withstand this because they never developed a truly mature ego. They only know how to reflect back what the world gives them. And when the world, specifically you, no longer reflects anything, they fall straight into the void psychoanalysts describe as the ego panic zone. There is a particular truth Jung always emphasized. People are not afraid of the truth. They are afraid of their own shadow. Narcissists spend their entire lives running from that shadow. They create a persona, a dazzling social mask, so no one sees the darkness. They build illusions of power, worth, specialness, irreplaceability, all to avoid facing the primordial emptiness at the core of their soul. But the empath's departure destroys that persona with a single truth. Someone once saw them, touched them, understood them, gave them what they never received in childhood, and that person left. Not because the narcissist wasn't good enough, but because the empath no longer wanted to lose themselves to keep someone who never stood on their own. In Melanie Klein's theory, the narcissist collapses back into a primitive psychological state called the depressive position, where the child faces the truth that love from others is not unconditional. When the empath leaves, the narcissist falls straight into that state, not hurting because you left, but hurting because, for the first time, they see they are not the center, not irreplaceable, not guaranteed. Your departure is not merely the loss of a relationship. It is the shattering of their self-illusion, the deepest pain a narcissistic ego can experience. And for this reason, it becomes the greatest lesson they will ever receive. Everything that once protected them, denial, attack, rationalization, blame, manipulation, collapses the moment your light disappears. In Kernberg's model, this is the collapse of defensive structure, where all psychological strategies that once suppressed the shadow are destroyed, and the shadow rises entirely. For the first time, the narcissist stands before themselves with no one left to adjust their image, and what they see terrifies them. The lack, the insecurity, the emptiness, the fragility parts they spent their life projecting onto you now return to attack them from within. In Bradshaw's research on shame core, narcissists are the group with the highest level of primal shame, yet the strongest avoidance of that shame. They will do anything to escape it, blame, create drama, attack, run, manipulate, but the empath's departure is the only situation in which they have no way out. Shame surges up with no one to contain it, no one to soothe it, no one to rewrite the story. And it is in this very moment that the lesson forms. No one tells them they are wrong. No one proves anything. No one argues. No one demands change. No one destroys them. There is only one soul withdrawing its energy back to where it belongs. And that is what they cannot bear. The empath's departure is unlike any failure the narcissist has experienced. With others, they can dismiss, replace, or treat them as non-existent. But with the empath, they lose the only person who ever saw them with eyes free of judgment. This loss forces them to realize that mature love is not worship, not unconditional tolerance, not sacrifice, not endurance. It is presence. And presence cannot be held through fear, psychological games, or emotional dominance. Winnicott's research shows that a person becomes their true self only when they are authentically mirrored by another. When the empath leaves, the narcissist realizes something they were never taught in childhood. Another person's presence is not a right, it is a gift. And when you walk away, they finally see that they squandered that gift. What makes the empath's departure the greatest lesson is not the pain, but the revelation of the limits of the power they believed they had. In Jungian psychology, when an archetype is pushed to its extreme, it is forced to transform. The narcissist's ego once lived in extremes. I am special. I am irreplaceable. I control everything. It's as I'm placed, the empath's departure shatters that extreme and forces them into the opposite pole. I have no power at all. This fall from omnipotent illusion to the truth of limitation is what Jung calls the starting point of transformation. Not everyone transforms. Many become more toxic. Many quickly seek new supply. Many construct new stories to rescue their ego. But no matter what they do, the lesson is etched into their unconscious. Someone who endured them, gave them everything, saw their worth, chose to leave, not because they were wrong, not because they were bad, not because you were better, but because you no longer belonged there. This is what many psychoanalysts call the narcissistic pivot point, the moment when the ego can no longer cling to external sources to maintain its illusion and is forced to face itself. Some face it with rebellion, violence, or rage. Some face it by fleeing. But deep in their psyche, the empath's departure carves a scar they never forget, not the scar of heartbreak, but the scar of awareness. The awareness that no one belongs to them. No one is their possession. No one is obligated to stay. No one is under their lifelong control. No one is responsible for saving them from themselves. And most importantly, not everyone who leaves costs them something. Sometimes the leaving takes away the part of themselves they depended on to survive. That is the real lesson. No words are more powerful than this truth. You did not leave to hurt them. You left so you would no longer hurt yourself. And that not anything spoken is the lesson the narcissist carries for life. There is a truth that those who have loved a narcissist only discover after a long journey. Liberation does not happen at the moment you leave, but at the moment you return. And that return is not to your home, your work, or your old life. It is a return to yourself, to the center of your soul that you lost while trying to become who they needed. What happens to the empath after they exit the narcissistic cycle is not gentle recovery. It is a spiritual rebirth so profound that Jung calls it individuation, the process of returning to the true shape of one's being. When an empath walks away, the first thing they experience is not freedom, but emptiness. Not emptiness because the other person is gone, but because their soul has been conditioned to live for someone else for too long. There are days they wake up and do not know where their own day begins, because for years their day began with someone else's needs. Empaths carry a particular structure: sharp intuition, deep emotion, strong empathy, and most dangerously, the tendency to see healing others as their mission. When they live beside a narcissist, that mission becomes the rope that binds them, causing them to forget that they too have wounds, they too need healing, they too have limits, they too have breaking points. Jung once said, "Nothing is more dangerous than becoming someone else's shadow." And the empath, in a relationship with a narcissist, has become exactly that shadow, quietly containing, quietly enduring, quietly softening storms that were never theirs. When they walk away, that shadow no longer has any reason to exist. And for the first time in many years, the empath sees themselves, not through the other person's eyes, not through the other person's expectations, not through the other person's emotions, but through their own truth. This is the stage psychologists call identity retrieval, the process of reclaiming a lost sense of self. Many studies show that highly sensitive people, or those with excessive empathy, often become dissolved in power-imbalanced relationships, to the point where the boundary between me and them blurs. When such a relationship ends, they feel as if they are living in a strange body, with a heart that no longer knows who to love, and a mind that no longer knows where it belongs. But this very lostness is the first step of the journey home. The empath begins to learn how to ask questions. At first, the questions are filled with confusion. Why did I accept that? Why did I stay silent for so long? Why did I try to save someone who didn't want to be saved? Why did I put them above myself? And then those questions gradually transform. How do I actually want to live? Who am I when I'm not playing the healer? How do I want to love? And who is worthy of that love? Who am I when I'm no longer afraid of being abandoned? This is the moment Jung calls the return of the self, the return of the true self after the persona, the role, has been burned away. And the empath, after so many years using their energy to maintain someone else's emotional world, finally turns that energy back toward nurturing themselves. This does not happen in a day, nor in some glorious way. It unfolds quietly, like a seed sprouting underground, silent yet unstoppable. As the empath begins to feel themselves again, their intuition, the very thing once strangled beneath the noise of manipulation, rises powerfully. The empath's intuition never disappeared. Its volume was simply turned down because they lived in an environment that forced them to constantly doubt themselves. The narcissist made them believe their instincts were wrong, their emotions were too much, their words were irrational. But once they leave, that primal sound returns. It doesn't come back as a voice. It comes back as clarity. The empath begins to look back at the past and realizes they were never wrong. They were simply made to doubt their own intuition by someone who was afraid of the truth it carried. And at this stage, something strange begins to happen. The empath becomes quieter. Not the quiet of exhaustion, but the quiet of someone who has begun to understand the value of their own energy. They start to understand that not everyone is worthy of the depth of love they carry in their heart. Not everyone should be allowed to touch their tenderness. Not everyone has the right to consume the fire inside them. This is the point that modern psychology calls boundary emergence, the awakening of personal boundaries. The empath did not lack boundaries before. They lacked awareness of their own worth. And once they recognize that worth, boundaries rise up naturally. No forcing, no declarations, no justifications. The empath's boundaries are not walls, they are light. A light that makes those who are incompatible quietly step back on their own. What makes this stage so miraculous is that the empath starts to realize they are not as weak as they once believed. Their strength does not lie in endurance, but in their capacity to be reborn. A person who has been drained to the point of feeling like nothing is left, yet still stands back up, that is someone strong in a way a narcissist will never be able to comprehend. Jung once wrote, "A soul that has passed through darkness will no longer fear the night." And the empath, after leaving the darkness of another person, realizes that their own darkness is not frightening. It is simply a place where they were never allowed to light a candle. As the rebirth deepens, the empath experiences a phenomenon therapists call emotional autonomy. This is when they realize their emotions are no longer controlled by the presence or absence of any particular person. They begin to feel themselves as separate, free, psychologically independent, no longer riding emotional waves that rise and fall with someone else. This is the most powerful stage, because the empath starts placing themselves at the center of their own life map, something the narcissist never wanted them to do. And then something profound happens. Their energy returns, not in a poetic sense, but in a purely psychological and neurobiological sense. When the empath steps out of a toxic ecosystem, their nervous system, which once lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, begins to slow down. They no longer hear another's footsteps with fear. They no longer pre-guess someone's mood in order to prepare a reaction. They no longer try to heal wounds that are not theirs. And in doing so, their body begins to remember what peace feels like. According to Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, only when the nervous system is no longer under threat can a person enter a state of true creativity, depth, and authentic connection, the very state an empath was born to live in. It is also in this phase that a new archetype awakens inside the empath. Jung calls it the warrior archetype. Not a warrior who wages war, but a warrior who protects. Someone who knows their limits, knows their resources, knows who is allowed into their world and who is not. Their silence now is no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who knows their voice does not need to be believed by everyone, it only needs to be true to themselves. Their peace is no longer the result of avoiding conflict, but the result of standing in the right place within their own life. When the empath reaches this stage, they enter a form of rebirth that psychoanalysts describe as self-sovereignty. This is when they no longer seek others to make them whole, no longer use love as a crutch for emotional survival, no longer let the fear of abandonment dictate their actions. They become the observer of their own life, not the one swept away by it. And it is precisely at this moment, when they stand firmly without needing anyone, that they become a version of themselves the narcissist can never reach. Not because they are cold or unfeeling, but because they have learned to reserve their light for places that deserve it. They become someone no one can manipulate, because they have seen the darkness not just in others, but in themselves. No one can use fear to control them anymore, because they have touched the point Jung calls the center of the self. The astonishing thing is, the empath does not become hardened. They become clear-sighted. They do not close their heart. They open it in the right places. They do not lose faith. They place their trust in those who know how to keep it. They do not become someone else. They become themselves whole, strong, and self-directed. And here is the strangest part. Leaving has turned them into someone they never imagined they could become. A soul with sovereignty, a heart with direction, a mind with the stillness of one who has walked through fire and has not been burned to ash. The narcissist always believes they are the one who created the stronger version of you. But the truth is the opposite. It is stepping away from them, reclaiming the energy that was lost, and facing the darkness they left behind that brings about the empath's rebirth. And in the end, the greatest lesson does not belong to the narcissist. It belongs to the empath. When you return to your true self, there is no darkness, however subtle, deep, or dangerous, that can swallow you a second time. And if you are hearing these words, perhaps a part of your soul has already traveled farther than you realize. You are no longer standing where you once stood, no longer the person you once were, and no longer carrying the old wounds in the way they once controlled you. You have just stepped through a doorway that not everyone is brave enough to touch, a doorway that leads you out of the loop of darkness and into what Jung calls the land of the self-knowing. Is there? Remember this. The darkness of another only has power when you abandon the light within yourself. But today, by understanding and daring to face the truth, you have withdrawn that power. You have closed a door the narcissist can never reopen, because it is no longer outside of you, it is within you. From this moment on, the journey is no longer about them, no longer about the pain, no longer about the old story. This journey is now about returning to the intuition you once doubted, returning to the boundaries you once surrendered, returning to the truth your heart always knew but you once feared to face. And if at times you feel yourself slowing down, growing tired, or losing direction, remember, even the moon has nights when it does not shine, but it has never lost its light. Neither have you. The light within you is merely gathering strength to shine brighter. Thank you for spending this time here in this space of awakening, of archetypes, of the Jungian shadow, of souls learning how to step out of the dissolving dream of the narcissist and stand on the solid ground of their own being. If you wish to walk this journey, stay, because every video here is not just words. It is a small milestone helping you reclaim the pieces of your soul you once dropped in someone else's darkness. We still have many things to say to each other. and your journey has only just begun.